Montana Territory, August 1879. The sky above the Tobacco Root Mountains burned gold with the last light of day when Francis Odell rode back to his ranch with his 6-year-old son asleep in the saddle in front of him. Dust clung to his hat brim and the creases of his shirt, and his shoulders ached from a long day fixing fence lines. But he was used to hard work. That was the only thing that had kept him upright since his wife died 2 winters ago. Now, everything he did was for his boy, Beau, and for the land his father had broken before him. He was almost to the gate when he saw her. A woman, standing alone outside the corral, holding a small carpet bag in both hands. Her dress was plain and dusty, her boots worn down to the leather. She looked somewhere near his age, mid-30s, maybe a little older, and her dark brown hair was pinned up neatly, though a few strands had come loose in the wind. She did not look lost. She looked like someone who had known loss and was still standing. Francis pulled his horse to a stop. Beau stirred, blinking up at him. "You see her, too?" Francis asked. Beau rubbed his eyes. "Who's that, Papa?" Francis swung down and set his son on the ground. "Let's find out." He walked slowly toward the woman, leading the horse by the reins. "Evening, ma'am." She nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Evening. I'm Francis Odell. This here's my place." Her eyes flicked to the boy, then back to him. "I'm sorry to show up uninvited, Mr. Odell. I heard in town that you sometimes hire help. I was told you had a child." Francis's brow furrowed. He knew half the town, but he did not remember seeing her before. "I do. That's Beau." "And you are?" "Margery Nolan." She straightened her shoulders. "I was staying with my cousin in Virginia City. Her husband decided I was no longer welcome in their home. Said I'm too old to be of any use to anyone." Beau tugged on his father's sleeve. "She does not look old." Francis smiled faintly. "No, she does not." Margery's eyes glistened just for a moment, but she blinked it away. "I know how to cook, clean, sew, and ride. I was a schoolteacher before I came west. I do not expect charity. I just need a place to earn my keep." Francis studied her. She did not look like she was begging. She looked like she had already been turned away too many times. "You got anywhere else to go?" "No, sir." Beau stepped closer to her. "I like your shoes," he said. Margery looked down at her scuffed boots and gave a small laugh. "Thank you. I like yours too." Francis exhaled. "Well, we have a spare room in the back. Not much, but it's clean. And we could use help in the kitchen and with Beau's lessons. You want to stay? You're welcome." She went very still. "Truly, I would not say it if I did not mean it." Margery pressed a hand to her chest, her voice caught. "Thank you." He nodded once. "Come on inside. You look like you could use supper." Inside the small log house, the fire was already low in the hearth, and the windows glowed with the last of the sunset. Margery took off her boots at the door and helped Beau wash his hands before supper. She moved quiet, efficient, like a woman who had lived among hard people and learned to do everything herself. Francis watched her as he sliced bread and spooned stew into bowls. She set the table without being asked, then sat beside Beau and helped him with his spoon when he got sleepy. That night, with Beau curled up in his bed and the crickets singing outside, Francis stood in the doorway of the spare room and watched Margery set her bag down. "I can fix up the barn if this feels too forward," he offered. She shook her head. "This is more than I ever expected." "Thank you." Francis nodded, then hesitated. "People in this country can be cruel about things they do not understand." "I am used to being talked about," she said. "But I am not used to being welcomed." "Well, you are now." He tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Miss Nolan." "Good night, Mr. Odell." Within a week, it was like Margery had always been there. She rose with the sun, packed lunches for Francis and Beau, taught Beau his letters after breakfast, and mended clothes by the fire in the evenings. She never asked for more than she was given, but Francis found himself giving more anyway. He brought home wildflowers from the pasture. She pressed them into the pages of an old ledger. He built her a bench on the porch. She painted the kitchen in soft yellow. Beau loved her instantly, called her Miss Margery with a grin, and followed her around like a shadow. Francis tried not to think too hard about how easy it was to come home now, how his house smelled like fresh bread and his son laughed more, how he found himself listening for the sound of her voice, her footsteps, the way she hummed when she ironed. One evening, after a hard day hauling hay, he came in to find Margery asleep in the rocking chair, Beau curled in her lap. Her hand rested protectively over the boy's back, her face peaceful in the lamplight. He stood there for a long moment, something aching in his chest. He had thought his heart was done, but it was not. 2 weeks later, word came from town that Margery's cousin had been talking, spreading rumors about her, about how she had no prospects, how she was too old to be wanted, how she was staying with a widower with a young son. Francis heard it from the blacksmith, who apologized for even repeating it. Francis wiped the sweat from his brow. She is twice the woman her cousin will ever be. That night, over supper, he looked across the table at Margery. She was quiet, but not ashamed. She never was. I heard what they said, he told her plainly. I figured you would. Francis leaned forward. I do not care what anyone says. You are everything my son and I need. Her mouth parted, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears. Francis reached across the table and took her hand, rough from work, warm from the fire. I mean it, he said. You belong here. If you want. She blinked fast, then nodded. I do. Beau looked up from his plate. Can she stay forever? Francis smiled. That is the plan, son. Margery laughed softly, wiping her eyes. Then I will. And just like that, the quiet house felt like a home again. September came with a brittle edge to the mornings, frost gathering in the grass before the sun crested the ridge. Margery kept Beau wrapped in a shawl while he practiced his sums on the porch, his cheeks pink with cold. Francis watched from the barn, pitchfork in hand, noting how easily she adapted to each small change in season, how she layered window quilts without being asked, how she soaked the beans early when she knew he'd be too long in the field for dinner. She didn't speak much of her past, but he noticed the way her eyes lingered on the mountains in the evening, like she had once looked to a different horizon and never truly arrived. He didn't press. He knew what it was to carry the shape of something you lost too long to name. One afternoon, after turning the last of the oat stubble with the mule team, Francis found her in the root cellar, sorting apples into a barrel lined with straw. She glanced up, brushing her hands on her apron. I hope you don't mind, she said. The Braxtons offered me what they couldn't put up. I traded them a jar of that blackberry preserve. You made a fair deal, he said, crouching beside her. That was a good batch. I used cloves this time. He reached for an apple, turning it in his palm. You always think ahead. Margery smiled faintly but didn't answer. Above them, the wind shifted, and the trapdoor creaked slightly on its hinge. Francis stood and offered her his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, her fingers cold from the cellar air. Later, as the sun peeled through the cottonwoods, Francis saddled the bay mare for her. She hadn't been riding since the day she arrived, and he could tell she missed it by the way her eyes followed the horses each morning. You trust me with her? She asked, tightening the cinch with practiced hands. She's steady, he said. And so are you. Margery mounted easily, skirts gathered to one side. Francis watched her ride out along the fence line, Beau waving from the porch with one of his carved pine animals clutched in his hand. When she returned near dusk, her cheeks were flushed and her hair had slipped from its pins. She looked years younger, the way joy sometimes did that to a person. She dismounted and led the mare inside the corral without needing help. I'd forgotten how good it feels, she said, to move under open sky. Francis nodded. You ride like you were born to it. I was born in Missouri, she said, brushing straw from the mare's flank. But I never fit there. My father taught me to ride, though. Said I took to it quicker than my brothers. You miss him? He passed before the war. I think he'd have liked it here. They stood in silence a moment, the mare flicking her tail lazily between them. That night, Francis found her on the porch after Beau had gone to bed, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The lantern behind the window cast a warm square of light across the floorboards, but she sat just outside of it, watching the stars blink into place. I can't tell what month it is by the sky, she said quietly. Back east, the stars looked different. You'll learn these, he said. They stay put. She tilted her head toward him. You always this steady, Francis? I try to be. For Beau mostly. But for you too now. She looked down at her hands. I wasn't sure if I'd ever have a place again. You've got one. She glanced up, eyes catching the lantern light. What do you see in me? He stepped closer, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Someone who doesn't quit. Someone who knows how to hold a house together with nothing but her own two hands. Someone who listens. You carry yourself like you've already been through the worst and still choose to be kind. Her breath caught, and she looked away, blinking. He didn't touch her, just stood beside her, letting the silence settle. I've been asked to leave more times than I can count, she said finally. Always too much of something. Too old, too quiet, too set in my ways. I came out here hoping it would be different. But I didn't expect. She stopped. Frances waited. She didn't finish the thought. Instead, she stood, pulling the shawl tighter. I should see to the morning loaf. He stepped aside to let her pass, but before she reached the door, he said, You're not too anything, Margery. You're just right. She paused, her back to him. Then she went inside, and the door clicked softly behind her. Frances stayed out a while longer, listening to the wind shift through the cottonwoods, the steady rhythm of something breaking loose inside him and coming to rest. The first snow came early that year, thin and dry, hissing against the windows before dawn. Frances lit the stove before waking Beau, careful not to let the cold reach too deep into the house. When Margery stepped into the kitchen, her sleeves already rolled and her cheeks flushed from the pump outside, she carried a kettle of water and the scent of wood smoke in her hair. You'll want to bring in the rest of the squash today, she said, setting the kettle to boil. Ground'll be too hard to dig by tomorrow. Frances nodded, buttoning his collar. We'll haul the crate up from the root cellar after chores. You mind if I start some soap? I've got the lye soaking already. That's fine, he said, glancing toward the window where the snow clung to the sill. You ever make it with ash from pine? I have. It's softer than oak, but it'll do. I steep it longer. Frances picked up his gloves from the chair and paused. You always know what to do. I've had to, Margery said, not looking up. There's not much room for guessing when you've no one to catch your mistakes. He didn't answer, just touched the doorframe as he passed, his boots thudding softly against the floorboards. By midday, the snow turned to a wet drizzle, and the air smelled of damp earth and smoke. Frances and Beau worked quietly, stacking the last of the firewood under the eaves while Margery stirred soap over the outdoor fire, her sleeves darkened with splashes of lye. She didn't flinch when the wind blew smoke into her eyes, just blinked and kept stirring. When the soap was poured into the molds and covered with cloth, she leaned against the porch rail, rubbing a burn on her wrist where the lye had caught skin. Frances spotted it as he approached, his hands blackened with bark. You need salve? I'll be fine, she said, pulling her sleeve over it. It's not deep. He didn't press, but later, when she stepped out of the kitchen to hang the cloths, she found a tin of tallow and beeswax near the basin, a strip of clean linen beside it. That night, after Beau had gone to sleep with a wool blanket pulled to his chin, Frances found Margery in the barn, checking the latch on the feed room. The lantern beside her cast a narrow pool of light, and her breath clouded in the cold. I was going to do that, he said. I couldn't sleep, she said, brushing hay from her sleeve. Too quiet. He leaned against the stall door, watching the horses shift in the straw. I used to think quiet was the same as peaceful, but it isn't always. No, she said softly. Sometimes it just means no one's left to speak to. Frances studied her in the half-light. You ever wish you'd stayed back east? She shook her head once. No, there was nothing left there for me. I came west because I wanted to keep choosing something, even if it was hard. He nodded slowly. I understand that. Margery turned toward him, the lantern light catching the tired lines around her mouth, the strength in them too. Do you ever think about what comes next? Frances took a breath. I do. More now than I used to. She didn't look away. And what do you see? He stepped forward, closing the space between them. I see you, Margery, teaching my boy how to read the weather by the sky, hanging laundry while he chases chickens at your heels, sitting across from me at the table, every day, not just the ones I'm lucky enough to catch you smiling. Her throat moved as she swallowed. And if I said I want that, I'd say you already have it, he said. But I'd ask you to stay for good, not just in this house, but with me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the breath between heartbeats, the weight of something long awaited finally touching down. I knew I could build a life, she said. I didn't know I'd be wanted in one. Frances reached for her hand, calloused and warm. You're everything my son and I need. She looked down at their joined hands, then up again, her eyes steady. Then I'll stay? For good. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then we'll build it. Together. Outside, Snow began to fall again, soft and soundless, blanketing the ground in the kind of hush that didn't feel empty at all. By mid-November, the wind pressed harder against the house, carrying the voice of winter down from the mountains. Francis had set storm shutters over the windows, checked the roof for leaks, and packed the stable tight with straw. They'd slaughtered the old hog the week before, and Margery worked for hours salting the meat and smoking the hams, her hands red from brine, her sleeves stiff with ash. One morning, while Beau traced letters in the corner with a charcoal stub, Margery stood at the table separating dried beans by color. Francis came in from the barn, mittens in his back pocket, and dusted snow from his sleeves. "There's a team coming through from Bozeman," he said, unwrapping his scarf. "Traders heading north before the pass closes. Stopped by the Jacksons' place, said they'll be passing our way tonight." Margery paused in her sorting. "We've got enough to feed them. If they'll trade, we've got extra flour and a few jars of that peach preserve. They'll want coffee," she said, already turning toward the pantry. Men on the trail always do. Francis watched her move, always a step ahead, always making room for someone else's need. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so Beau wouldn't hear. "You don't have to do all this." Margery's hands didn't slow. "I know I don't." He let that sit a moment. "You want me to say no to visitors? I don't mind it. So long as they eat, thank you, and ride on." "They will." That evening, the sound of horses came just after dusk. Two men, one grizzled, the other younger, red-faced from cold, dismounted in the yard. Francis met them with a lantern. Margery stayed just inside, Beau leaning against her hip. The older man doffed his hat. "Name's Ridley. That's my nephew, Elam. Heard you've got a warm stove and an honest table." Francis nodded. "We've got both. Come in." The men stamped snow from their boots and settled at the table, grateful but watchful in the way of men used to long miles and cold nights. Margery set bowls of stew before them, added bread and apple slices without a word. Elam watched her closely, more curious than anything. "You the missus?" Margery straightened. "I keep the house." Ridley gave his nephew a look, but Francis answered before the silence could stretch. "She's family," he said plainly. Later, after the men had eaten and the horses were fed, Margery stood by the hearth, drying her hands. Francis leaned beside her, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin. "They'll be gone by first light," he said quietly. "You mind them being here?" "They didn't ask more than they were given," she said. "That's enough." Francis nodded. "You've got a way of knowing what folks carry, even when they don't say. I've had to learn how to read a room before I walk into it. You don't have to do that here. Not with us." She looked up, eyes catching the firelight. "You ever wonder if peace is something you have to earn, or if it's just waiting for you to stop running?" "I stopped running when I buried her," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever move again. And now, I'm still," he said. "Because you're here." She reached up then, slow and sure, and touched the edge of his collar, as if to smooth something there. Her hand lingered. "I never expected to be looked at like that again," she said. Francis didn't move, didn't speak, just let his hand find hers, warm and steady. "You're seen now," he said. "Every part." She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, just for a breath, just long enough to feel the weight shift from her spine to his. Behind them, the fire popped. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a low hum. And in the quiet that followed, nothing felt unfinished. By late December, the snow had deepened enough that Francis had to hitch the sleigh instead of saddling the mare. He wore his father's fur-lined coat, and Beau's mittens were stitched double by Margery's hand. The wind had settled into a constant low moan across the hills, but inside the house, the walls held warmth steady, the scent of boiled molasses and dried orange peel drifting from the kitchen. Margery sat by the window in the small chair he'd built back when Beau was still learning to walk. Her hair was down for once, thick and loose over her shoulders, drying from the wash she'd taken earlier. She'd never worn it that way before, not even in the evenings, but now she did, and when Francis walked in from tending the stock, he stopped short at the sight of her. "You're letting it down now," he said. She didn't turn away from the window. "Only today. It's almost Christmas. Thought I'd give myself that." He stepped closer, brushing snow from the cuffs of his coat. "I like it. You look younger." She glanced at him, but her voice held something unreadable. "I'm not. I know. That's part of why I like it." Beau called out from the other room, asking for more paper. Margery rose, her braid half formed now, and pulled a folded sheet from the drawer. Frances watched her move with the quiet assurance she always carried. But something rested under her stillness today, something that hadn't been there before. Expectation, maybe, or hesitation. That night, after the stew had cooled and Beau was tucked beneath the quilt Margery had finished just last week, Frances found her in the back room, turning down the lamp. There was a wrapped parcel on the table beside her. It was small, tied with twine. She saw his eyes settle on it. "It's not much," she said. "But I wanted you to have something." He took it and untied the string slowly. Inside was a pair of gloves, stitched from fine hide, the seams tight and even. "I found the leather folded in the back of that old trunk," she said. "Figured it was wasted sitting there." He turned the gloves in his hands. "They're perfect." She nodded, but her gaze didn't quite meet his. "I wasn't sure if it was right, giving you something that personal." He stepped forward, set the gloves on the chair, and took her hands in his. "Margery, this whole place feels different since you came. Warmer. More like what I'd hoped a home might be." She shook her head, voice low. "I didn't come here expecting to belong. I just needed a place to stop falling." "Well, you've landed," he said. "And I've been waiting for the day I could ask you something I've been carrying around too long." She looked up. "I want you to marry me." Her breath caught, but she didn't step back. "I'm not asking out of debt or comfort," he said. "I'm asking because when I think about the rest of my life, I see it with your voice in the next room, with your hands baking bread, with your hair loose in winter." She covered her mouth with her fingers for a moment. Then she laughed, not a sound he'd heard from her before. It was soft and astonished, like something had let go inside her. "I thought I was past being asked," she said. "Past being wanted." "You were wrong." She nodded. "Yes." He blinked. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, slow and sure, and she leaned into it like someone who'd gone a long time without leaning on anything. His hand found the base of her spine, hers curled at his collar. The house was silent, but full, the kind of full that comes when everything has finally found its place. They were married 3 days later in the parlor, with the Jacksons standing witness and Beau holding tight to his father's leg. Margery wore a blue dress she'd let down at the hem, and Frances had trimmed his beard so close Beau declared he looked like a preacher. They said no vows beyond what was needed, but when Frances took her hand and slipped the silver ring his mother's onto her finger, the words held weight that didn't need decoration. At supper, Margery served pork roast and cornbread, and after the Jacksons rode off through the snow, she and Frances stood together on the porch in the hush of early night, the sky pale with stars. He held her close, the ring on her hand catching the moonlight. "You warm enough?" "I am now." She leaned into him. "Frances, I want to give Beau a sister." He looked down at her, surprised, and then a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You sure?" "I am." He kissed her forehead. "Then we'll build room." They went to bed that night with the fire long burned down and the house wrapped in quiet. Frances pulled her close beneath the quilt, and she rested her head against his chest, fingers laced with his. Winter passed with heavy snow, but few storms. Margery's belly swelled come spring, and Frances built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth even after his hands had blistered. Beau practiced writing his name again and again, determined to be ready to teach his sister when she arrived. In June, a daughter was born just after sunrise, with Margery's strength and Frances's calm. They named her Clara, after Margery's mother, and she slept with one fist curled tight as a seed. That summer, the house smelled of milk and wild mint. Frances taught Beau how to set traps by the creek. Margery read aloud in the evenings from the old books she'd brought west, her voice steady over the sounds of a crackling fire and a child's laughter. There were no more visitors save the ones they invited. The fields grew tall with barley, and their cellar stayed full. On the porch each evening, Frances held Clara in his arms while Margery leaned into his side, her head resting against his shoulder like it had always known its place. And they were happy, not in the way of stories where everything is grand, but in the quiet way of two people who've stopped running, who have seen enough of sorrow to recognize peace when it finally sits down beside them. They stayed that way for all the years that followed. Together. Home.